Hi, welcome to the Thinking Podcast. We have with us a very exciting guest. We have Tim Brown, one of the founders of Allbirds, which is a shoe company. Got mine on here today. Check them out. It's a shoe company that's not only extremely fashionable, like we're seeing it all over the place, seeing it in articles from fashion magazines to tech magazines to just on the train. We're seeing it all over the place, but also has really interesting mission and motivation behind the company. It's not just cool looks. There's a lot of ways that they're rethinking how they do business, how they build culture, how they build product. And so this is an exciting opportunity to get into the mind of someone who we consider a great entrepreneur and see, how do they make their dreams come true? What do you do starting from day one through the present day, through the future, to take a big audacious goal and break it into smaller parts and get it done? So Tim, thanks for being with us today.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So take us back in time to when this was all just an idea for Allbirds, and what was that idea, and what kind of sparked it? I mean, you're a smart guy. There's a lot of problems you could be solving in the world. Like, what was it about the problem here with Allbirds that you were really interested in solving?
So I was back in my native New Zealand. I actually had my previous career was actually in professional sport. I played soccer for nearly a decade, and I kind of had my afternoons free. I didn't want to play PlayStation, and I was very interested in creating and branding and in making. I didn't grow up on a sheep farm. I didn't grow up with 300 pairs of shoes in my cupboard, but I think I saw an opportunity in footwear. I think I was sponsored by Nike at the time. Everything had logos, so I think this started off as a bit of a design insight that you could create something that was unbranded, something that was better than a Chuck Taylor and cheaper than a Common Projects. I knew nothing about shoes, but I set out to try and solve that problem. It was very much my problem. I embarked on a kind of what, in hindsight, was a little bit of a crazy journey to solve that. I found a factory in my off season. I learned how to kind of make shoes really from nothing, and launched an initial sort of product that started to solve that problem. And I think, as is always the case with these journeys, once you start trying to solve one problem or ask yourself one question, there's a thousand more that pop up, and that's what happened for us.
And what was the initial vision of what the company and what the product would be?
There wasn't a great one. There was, in my particular case, I had the virtue of time, so I was not building this thing to pay my rent, or it was really about scratching an itch, about satisfying a curiosity. And I set out to see if I could make something, and it just so happened to be that I started in shoes. And we made a shoe, we sold a shoe, we learned a ton. I was working largely with my brother at the time and a buddy that I played football with, and it was completely amateurish. But we started, and I think sometimes, like when I look back, a lot of times people see problems, they think about solving them, they talk about solving them, but oftentimes just beginning is the hardest part. And I look back now, and there's no real plan behind it. It was a curiosity project.
Okay, and then when did it feel real for you? Like when did it go from, okay, this is a cool idea, to like, okay, this is real?
Yeah, so fast forward a number of years, we realized that the footwear industry hadn't really changed for hundreds of years, that a lot of things were just done the way they were because that's how they'd always been done. We were really fascinated by the idea that natural materials were largely ignored by the footwear industry, who seemed to default to cheap synthetics and nasty leathers. And really sort of kind of over a period of time tried to sort of work out if there was a better way. And through that period, there was kind of a little bit of a seminal moment, because we got excited by the idea of wool and comfort and what that might be able to be. And we're, again, curious as to why wool had never been used in footwear before. And we applied for, while I was still playing football, and won a relatively sizable research grant to basically solve that problem. New Zealand is the land of many, many sheep. In the 70s, there was 70 million. Now there's less than 30 million. And the wool industry is like crying out for innovation. And we seem to, just at the right time, tap into a little bit of a need for new markets and new uses for wool.
So everyone's just like, we have all this wool. Like, we got to figure out more uses for this wool. If we could eat this wool, we would do that.
Right. So was that good management or good luck? We got this grant over a couple of years. It was developed for us. And
it's interesting. The New Zealand government has grants to figure out how to put more find more uses for wool.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's a government grant or whatever it is, I think the underlying point is if you ask the right questions or you ask a good question, people will help you find the answer.
Sure.
And oftentimes, a lot of that stuff's around, and you don't think to ask it. Anyway, I went to the World Cup very fortunately with New Zealand in 2010 and played in South Africa at the World Cup and decided it wasn't going to get any better for me in my football career, and retired and went off to business school in London, and all of a sudden had a little bit of shoemaking knowledge and a woolen textile innovation. And so I put those two together at a class I took, an entrepreneurship class I took at Kellogg at Northwestern actually, and with a professor called Carter Cast, who used to just an amazing teacher and someone who's still in touch with the business and what we're up to, and basically just was encouraged with all the best spirit of American entrepreneurship and business to go give it a go. And I did that in 2014. I launched a Kickstarter campaign. All of a sudden these wool shoes just blew up, and
how did you do on Kickstarter?
I mean, I got to the end of my grad school and I was like, look, like what do I do now? Like I had definitely some strands in my life and some thoughts about the next stage of my career. I was, call it 33, and had never had a proper job in my mind, and what did the rest of my career look like? And I had this business idea and was encouraged just to give it a go. And again, sometimes you overthink that first step. I think in New Zealand and England, that first step is much harder culturally. In America, everyone embraces it. Go, have a go. What's the worst that could happen? Failure doesn't matter. In New Zealand and England, where I was doing school, that type of step is often sort of a lot harder. And I think coming to America was quite instrumental for me in embarking on this journey. And I got a buddy in New Zealand to help me shoot a video. I ran around, chased some sheep on a farm in New Zealand, and I launched this thing on Kickstarter, not knowing whether my mum would be the only person to buy a pair or whether there was something there. And in 4 days we sold 120 grand. I ran out of fabric. I had to shut the whole thing down, and and then I very quickly transitioned to the much larger problem of trying to deliver on that demand.
Yeah.
But it started, and then
we always call it a good problem to have, but then we always follow that by saying, but it's still a problem.
Yeah, of course. And I think lots of challenges. It certainly was trying to get this thing off the ground, to build a supply chain.
So you already had the design is already locked in. I'm just saying, order of operations for anyone listening. So you knew what the shoe was going to look like. You knew what was cool about it. You knew the selling features. You knew roughly how you would make it at scale.
Yep.
You'd figured out a lot of that. So you put in a lot of work without knowing if anyone besides your mom. I mean, I'm sure you talked to people and you still thought it was a good idea, but in general, you didn't know if this was going to be a $1 million idea or like a $5,000 idea.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily know until you put in the work and then validated it on Kickstarter.
Yeah, call it product market fit. Became very clear to me there was something there.
Once you were on Kickstarter.
Yeah, and I had a clear vision for what I was trying to achieve, and I was designing effectively for myself. I was trying to solve a problem for myself. And I think the Kickstarter validated that there was more than just me that had that problem. I think it very quickly transitioned to the challenges of supply chain, construction, and building for scale and growth and quality, and all the challenges that anyone who tries to make something runs into. And it was just awful. It was incredibly hard. I learned a ton. All the bad times that create good lessons. And then sort of kind of got through the end of that year and was like, look, this has been a great adventure. Is this a business? Is this a larger idea? What does this mean? What are we trying to do? What's the larger underlying mission here? For me personally, and can I achieve it, or is this just a kind of a one-off thing? And I met my now co-founder. Our wives are best friends. They went to college together on the East Coast, and he's from San Francisco. Very, very smart dude, engineer, business school guy who'd worked in the renewable materials space, Joey Zwillinger. And he kind of came together to take on the half of the business that I was not doing very well. And it was just one of those perfect sort of partnerships and perfect moments in time to kind of come together on this. And we decided that this wasn't just one shoe or a product, that there was a huge opportunity to build a sustainable brand in the footwear space, that there was a huge paradox that existed in fashion, really, that if you ask kind of 100 people on the street, 99 of them care about sustainability, and then when it goes to buy stuff, it goes out the window. And we saw really a big opportunity to sort of bridge that gap, to change the way people perceive sustainable products. And that was kind of the underlying idea that we came to consolidate around, and we raised a round of money led by Lera Hippau in August of 2015 and relaunched essentially the brand as Allbirds on the 1st of March this year.
And then from a fashion perspective, I think that's something that we haven't talked yet about, like the idea of using wool, the idea of having a renewable source for materials, something that had been not looked at. But let's talk about the fashion for a second, because I think that there's something really interesting going on with Allbirds, where the other day my co-founder Geoff, he has the like all white ones, and we were on the train and we see someone who couldn't be more like demographically just different. Like it was a blonde woman. Geoff is Asian American, and they couldn't be more like different like corners of the fashion world. But she's completely dressed differently, totally everything different. But then at the bottom, same white on white Allbirds, and it's a funny moment because it's like two completely different. Like everything else they're wearing is totally different. Their entire image is all completely different, and then they're wearing the same thing. And so, what is it about the brand that you've built that's got that kind of crossover appeal, where you don't see that often? Usually, there's men's shoes, there's women's shoes, there's men's apparel, women's apparel, and they're different things. What is it that you've? What is the thought process that's gone into it to make it have that type of crossover appeal?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think maybe it helps to give a little bit of a sense of how we view the footwear industry. And I think the way that we see it is that there's kind of, call it $60 billion in America. It's really three distinct chunks. There is the sports performance space where Nike and Adidas make great products for their athletes down in Rio, and it's about innovation and shaving grams of weight off shoes and smashing Olympic records, and it's pretty incredible what happens there. And I think if you look at the other end of the spectrum, there's the fashion industry, and that's about catwalks and styles and high price points and trends, and that's hugely interesting as well and inspiring. And we don't play in either of those segments. Right smack bang in the middle is what we call kind of the Foot Locker world, the casual footwear market, which is a little bit of an afterthought for both the fashion brands and for the sports performance brands. And it's where Nike still sells a bunch of product. They sell sneakers stamped with a swoosh, made in Vietnam, but it often is an afterthought for these companies, and it's not where the innovation happens. It's certainly not where a lot of thoughtfulness about sustainability happens. And then kind of the final piece for us is there's not a lot of focus on kind of the number one reason why people buy casual footwear, which is comfort. And so we sort of saw a big opportunity to create a brand there that had meaning, that solved that particular problem. We started with a sneaker. And when we started with a sneaker, it wasn't about offering 1,000 SKUs or 16 styles and changing it every week with multiple colorways. It was what was our perspective on the problem and how could we solve it with one product. And so it was all about distillation. We distilled it all down to its simplest form. When you look at our shoe, aside from really one detail that is a little flourish, you couldn't take anything away. There's no fewer seams. We're breaking a whole bunch of rules in the way shoes are traditionally made that we didn't know we were breaking until recently. And it's about a utility. So I don't think about our brand as a fashion product, although there's a fashionable element to it. I think about us as solving a problem around comfort and movement and getting your friend and your CEO from work in the simplest possible way to have a choice when he wakes up in the morning that is a non-choice. There's just a shoe there that is there and functional and delivering on its promise, and it's comfortable, and so I think that's allowed us to sort of whisper possibly when lots of other brands in the footwear space, and there's many of them, are screaming.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about a lot of what you've done is design the shoe for yourself. Design a shoe that you really want to see in the world, and I think that's a common trend we see around a lot of innovators. Like Mark Zuckerberg made Facebook because it was the platform he wanted to have in college, and there's a lot of innovation that happens when people that's autobiographical in that way, where people design something that they personally want. There's also innovation that happens very differently. That happens, listen to your users, or try to find a problem that's out there and try to solve it, and listen to what people want. And they're both important. And there's no right or wrong way, I wouldn't say. My question to you is, how do you find the balance between listening to your own convictions, your own vision, versus like humbly listening to users, hearing what they have to say, and how do you make decisions there?
Yeah, it's again, it's another really interesting question. I mean, I think it's probably important to clarify that sometimes when people talk about instinct or gut feel, it's sometimes, certainly in an entrepreneurial context or a design context where I was trained as a designer when I went to university, what you're doing is effectively taking 1,000 data points, observations, thoughts, glimpses, an article from the New York Times, something you've seen, a whisper you've heard in an elevator, and you're taking all these data points and you're synthesizing it into a sense or a feeling or a point of view on something. And it's really powerful. And I think if you listen to it and you develop it and you cultivate it and you trust it, I think it's the best sense of or direction that anyone has. I think oftentimes people shut it out because they're too analytical or they're looking for more of a database sort of explanation. And that always has a place, right? But I think that personal instinct is a very, very powerful voice that we have, and it's oftentimes incredibly complicated and analytical in its own way.
That's interesting. I think that, that's very interesting. There's that sense of, in order to know what the user wants, we need to do user research, we need to create the personas, we need to be very analytical, we need to survey people, we need to see what exactly the market wants, and that has its place, of course, but what I'm also hearing from you is that with the right person on your team, or like you could be that person too, like you've talked to 1,000 people, you've had just through day-to-day life, through life experiences, you've empathized with countless hundreds, thousands of people, you've thought about this, read the article here, seen the blog post there, and then when you sit down in the room, you kind of represent and warrant that mind share of what all those people were thinking without having to like explicitly go talk to them. Granted, I'm not like poo-pooing the idea of like go talk to users if you're running a company, if you're in design, go talk to users, but like that there's something very powerful about that type of person who's just so in touch that by being in the room, you kind of channel what the zeitgeist is of what people want.
Yeah, it's the power of curiosity. And I think oftentimes we talk about in our team sort of the why behind the what. And you can ask someone what the problem is, they often won't tell you why. And so often, observing, understanding the question that you're answering, understanding the right time to ask that question. I sort of think when you're innovating, there's a time to be really open and there's a time to be closed. And I think even when we're developing new products, as we're intensely doing at the moment, there's a time to keep that with our tiny, small product team and to not ask for input and to trust our instinct, to be quite selfish and incredibly focused with the vision that we have and trying to achieve it in the best way that we know how. It's a classic case of where consensus can ruin an idea, where multiple voices are not welcome. And then there's a time, oftentimes when you prototype something or you're in the early stages of understanding what something is, that you need to open it up to the world.
Let it breathe.
Yeah, and take all the feedback that you can possibly get and the punches that come along with it and really listen. And not just listen to what people say, not the what, but really understand the why of why they're saying that. And that can be really, really tough. But I think you need to understand those two things as distinct phases. You need to be very, very closed in the early stages, often when you're incubating something, when it's precious and fledgling and probably and oftentimes crazy. And then you got to open it up. And I think I have this like wonderful cadence with my co-founder who's an engineer who looks at everything with incredible rigor. And he gives me the absolute best feedback of anyone when it comes to evaluating a solution. And he's in some ways, and I say this to his face, kind of the worst guy to have around when an idea is very esoteric and makes no sense because he's so smart. And so, and equally, I'm the worst person to probably have around when we're trying to solve a quite analytical supply chain problem.
Because you're dreaming of the...
Yeah, I'm jumping steps. And so I think that, I think it's one of the reasons why our partnership is so strong and so powerful and why we've been able to, I think, achieve things that either one of us could not maybe have done. But I think it speaks a lot to the innovation process too, of having this ability to kind of close it up and open it at different cadences.
Yeah. And one thing I would also say, so you're saying close it in the beginning when it's fragile, open it up when you're getting feedback. I think there's also this closing that goes on when it's time to make decisions too. You might brainstorm, get a bunch of ideas. This person said this thing, this person said this thing, bunch of cool suggestions, and then you kind of have to coalesce it back down and refine it from all this feedback that we've gotten. You have to somehow match that against, do you want to do the more expensive thing that's nicer or the less expensive thing that's gonna mean more people can have it? And there's something like that can a lot of times be a judgment call.
Yeah, and look, if you look back at the arc of achievement, there's no secret to that. Yeah. It's just the courage to do that time and time and time again until you get it right. And you know, the Wool Runner product that we've launched is you know, there's no secret to it. It's hundreds and hundreds of variations of initially thinking there was a performance element to it, of taking a long time to understand the sort of the power of comfort and what that meant. Price points that we experimented with, really deeply understanding and empathy for the users and the problem that we were solving. I mean, all that stuff, there's no secret sauce there. It's just courage and tenacity and the ability to kind of not rest. And usually, you know, if you're prepared to keep going with something like that, eventually you'll get there. And I mean, I know that's a cliche, but if you look at the arc of achievement, I mean, even when I look back on my football career, a good chunk of it wasn't great. And then you get to the World Cup and it looks fantastic. And so I think it's the same thing here. And I definitely, you know, I think there's huge parallels with what I've previously experienced in sport and what we're going through here.
Well, neat. So for any parting words, I mean, where can people find you? I assume check out allbirds.com. Anything else that you wanted to?
Oh no, look, I'm just thanks for having us. I mean, I sort of think, you know, starting something, building a business, as you well know, is one of the hardest things you ever have to do, and it's also the most rewarding. And I'm having a great time. Plenty of things that we could be doing better, and a long way to go, but so far so good. So I just think that the more I get into it, anyone who goes and has a go at doing something, just takes courage, and I you know, whether it's a success or a failure or whatever level it gets to, good on them for having a go.
Awesome.
Thanks, man.
I just want to say to everyone out there, thank you, thinkers, for listening in. You can check us out on YouTube, SoundCloud, on the Google Play Store, and also, of course, iTunes. So thanks for listening, and let us know any questions. We love getting questions from you. See you next time.